Here's a question. When you're in a conversation, where is your attention? Are you truly listening to the other person? Or are you thinking about how you sound? Are you planning what to say next? Are you worried about what they think of you? Welcome to Talk, Learn, Teach, where we grow as language learners and as human beings. I'm James.
And I'm Emma, and honestly, this topic changed everything for me. When I stopped being so focused on myself, my relationships improved, my confidence grew, and here's the interesting part, my English improved too.
Because when you stop thinking about yourself all the time, you can actually engage with people. You can listen. You can learn from them.
And that's what we're exploring today. So if you're someone who gets stuck in your own head, or if you find yourself always thinking about how you're being perceived, this episode is for you. Please subscribe to Talk, Learn, Teach. We release new episodes every week, and we cover topics that help you grow as a learner and as a person.
And share this with someone who needs it. Tell your friends about Talk, Learn, Teach. Let's build a community of people who are learning to look beyond themselves.
Before we dive in, let me tell you something. Self-obsession is not the same as having self-esteem. Let me explain that, because I think a lot of people confuse these two things.
What's the difference?
Self-esteem is knowing your worth. It's understanding that you have value, and that's healthy. But self-obsession is being constantly focused on yourself. It's like all roads lead back to you. Every conversation, every situation, every moment is about how it affects you.
I see. So self-esteem is balanced, but self-obsession is excessive.
Exactly. And I used to be very self-obsessed. I didn't realize it at first, but looking back, I can see it clearly.
What did that look like?
When I was in a group, I was always thinking, are they judging me? Do they like me? Am I saying the right things? My attention was turned inward. I wasn't really present with the people around me.
And how did that affect your relationships?
It made them shallow. I had a lot of acquaintances, but not many real friends, because real friendship requires you to be interested in the other person, to ask them questions, to listen to their answers, and I wasn't doing that.
You were too focused on yourself.
Right. And I think this is a big problem for a lot of people, especially in today's world. We have social media, and everyone is curating their image. Everyone is posting about themselves.
It's a culture of self-focus.
Yes, and I think it's making us lonelier, because the antidote to loneliness is connection. But real connection requires genuine interest in other people.
So the first step is recognizing that you're self-obsessed. Can you tell us more about the signs?
Sure. One big sign is that you talk about yourself a lot. If you're in a conversation and most of your words are about your experience, your problems, your achievements, that's a sign.
Another sign would be that you always bring the conversation back to you, right?
Yes. Someone shares something about their life, and you immediately say, oh, that reminds me of when I... You're not letting them finish. You're jumping back to your story.
I definitely used to do that. I thought I was making connections by relating to people's stories, but actually, I was taking their moment and making it about me.
And another sign is that you avoid listening. You're too busy thinking about what you're going to say next, or you're busy judging what they're saying, or you're comparing their life to yours.
So basically, you're not actually present.
Right. You're physically in the room, but mentally you're somewhere else. You're in your own head.
Now, why is this a problem? I think a lot of people wonder, why should I care about being self-obsessed? If I'm focused on myself, I can achieve my goals.
That's the seductive thing about self-obsession. It feels productive. It feels like you're taking care of yourself. But actually, it creates a lot of suffering.
How?
Well, first, it isolates you. Humans are social creatures. We need connection. And connection is impossible when you're only focused on yourself.
So you end up lonely.
Yes. And that loneliness makes you anxious, and anxiety makes you more self-focused. It becomes a cycle.
That's a difficult cycle.
It is. And there's something else. When you're always focused on yourself, you develop a fragile sense of self, because your worth becomes dependent on external things, what people think, your accomplishments, your appearance.
And those things are constantly changing.
Exactly. So your confidence is unstable. You're always seeking validation.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. I was exhausted. I was constantly thinking, am I good enough? Do people like me? Am I succeeding? And it was like carrying a heavy weight.
What changed for you?
I had a moment. I was with a friend who was going through something really difficult, and I realized I had no idea what was actually going on in her life because I had never asked. I was always talking about myself.
That must have been hard to realize.
It was. I felt ashamed, and I asked her, "Can you tell me what's going on? I want to really listen." And she started talking, and I just listened. No judgment, no trying to relate, no planning my response, just listening.
And how did that feel?
It felt wonderful. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't focused on myself. I was focused on another human being, and there was something beautiful about that.
That's a powerful moment.
It was. And from that moment on, I started changing. I started making it a practice to really listen to people, to ask them questions, to be interested in their lives.
And how did that change things?
Everything. My friendships became deeper. I felt less anxious. I felt more confident, ironically, because I wasn't constantly seeking validation. I was getting genuine connection.
So the irony is that by focusing less on yourself, you actually feel better about yourself.
Yes, that's the paradox. The more you give attention to others, the lighter you feel, the more secure you become.
Now, I want to talk about this specifically for English learners, because I think English learners are particularly prone to self-obsession. Why do you think that?
Because learning a language is hard. It requires a lot of internal focus. You're thinking about grammar, you're thinking about pronunciation, you're thinking about whether you sound right. There's a lot of self-consciousness involved.
That makes sense. You're hyper-aware of yourself.
Right, and that hyper-awareness can turn into self-obsession. You're so focused on how you sound that you forget to actually connect with the person you're talking to.
And that's the worst thing you can do for language learning, because language is a tool for communication. It's a tool for connection.
Exactly. So the English learner who is constantly thinking, am I pronouncing this right? Do they understand me? Do I sound good? Is actually hindering their own progress.
Because they're not actually engaging, they're performing.
And nobody wants to talk to someone who is performing. People want to talk to someone who is genuine, someone who is interested in them.
So for English learners, learning to be less self-obsessed is actually a language learning strategy.
Yes, it's one of the best strategies, because when you shift your focus from yourself to the other person, something magical happens. You relax. Your English flows more naturally. You make fewer mistakes.
Because you're not overthinking.
Right. Your brain is free to use the English you already know, instead of being stuck in anxiety and self-judgment.
Now, I want to give some practical advice. How do you actually train yourself to be less self-obsessed?
Good question. I think the first thing is awareness. You have to notice when you're being self-focused.
Yes, and this requires honesty. You have to observe yourself without judgment. You're not bad for being self-focused, it's human, but you can notice it and make a different choice.
One practice that helped me was to count how many times I mentioned myself in a conversation. I would talk to someone, and then afterward, I would think about how many times I said I or me and I.
That's a good awareness tool.
And I was shocked. I was saying I constantly. Every other sentence was about me.
What did you do with that information?
I set a goal. In my next conversation, I would try to reduce that number. I would ask more questions. I would talk less about myself.
And did it work?
It did. And the funny thing is, people loved it. They felt heard, they felt seen, and ironically, they became more interested in me because I was interested in them.
That's beautiful. So the shift is from trying to impress people to actually caring about them.
Exactly. And when you make that value shift, the behaviors follow naturally.
Now, another practice I want to mention is curiosity. Genuine curiosity about other people.
How do you develop that?
I think you start by asking better questions. Instead of asking surface-level questions like, how are you? You ask deeper questions.
Like what?
Like, what was something interesting that happened to you this week? Or what's something you're thinking about lately? Or what do you enjoy doing?
These are questions that invite people to share more.
Right, and when you ask these questions, you're inviting people into deeper conversation, and you're showing that you care about their inner life, not just their surface.
And then the key is to actually listen to the answers.
Yes, really listen, not just wait for your turn to talk. Actually absorb what they're saying. Notice their emotion, notice their energy.
This is a skill that takes practice.
It does, but it's worth it, because this is the skill that creates deep relationships.
Now, for English learners, this is also an incredible language learning opportunity.
How?
Because when people are sharing something they care about, they speak naturally. They're not thinking about grammar, they're just expressing themselves. And if you listen closely, you're learning real English, not textbook English, but living English.
That's such a good point. So by focusing on other people, you're actually improving your English skills.
And you're also improving your listening skills because you're not distracted by thoughts about yourself. You're fully focused on understanding what the other person is saying.
Okay, here's another thing I want to talk about. The tendency to always make things about yourself. This is a really common form of self-obsession.
What do you mean?
Like, someone shares something and you immediately relate it back to your own experience, instead of just acknowledging what they shared.
Can you give an example?
Sure, someone says, "I'm feeling really tired lately," and instead of asking why or showing empathy, you say, "Oh yeah, I'm tired too. I stayed up late last night watching a show." You've made their fatigue about your fatigue.
Ugh, I do this all the time.
Most of us do, but it's a habit we can break. The practice is to pause. When someone shares something, pause. Acknowledge what they said. Ask a follow-up question. Show genuine interest in their experience.
So instead of jumping to your own story, you stay with them a little longer.
Exactly. You validate their experience. You make them feel heard. And only if it's relevant should you share your own experience.
And when you do share, you bring it back to them. You don't let it become all about you.
Right. You say something like, "I can understand that. I had a similar experience, but tell me more about yours. What's that been like for you?"
You're keeping the focus on them.
Yes, and this is not difficult. It just requires intention. It requires choosing to care about the other person more than you care about promoting yourself.
I think that's the core of it. It's a values shift. Instead of valuing self-promotion, you value connection.
Exactly. And when you make that values shift, the behaviors follow naturally.
Now, I want to talk about something that I think is related, and that's the need for attention or validation.
Yes, because self-obsession often comes from this hunger for validation.
Why do we have that hunger?
Usually it comes from earlier experiences. Maybe we didn't get enough attention as children, or we didn't feel valued. So now we're constantly seeking that validation from others.
And that leads to self-focused behavior.
Yes, because everything becomes about, do people like me? Do I matter? Am I worthy? And that's an impossible question to answer by focusing on yourself.
Because you're looking outside yourself for the validation.
Right, but validation that comes from outside is always temporary. Someone compliments you today, but what about tomorrow?
So you're always chasing.
Yes, and it never fills the hole. The only real solution is to develop self-validation, to know your own worth.
How do you do that?
I think part of it is recognizing that your worth is not dependent on what you do or achieve. Your worth is inherent. You have value just because you exist.
That's a deep shift.
It is, and it takes time to really integrate that belief. But once you do, you stop needing other people's validation so desperately.
And that frees you to actually care about them without an agenda.
Exactly. You're not trying to get them to like you or validate you. You're genuinely interested in them.
And that creates real connection.
Yes, and ironically, when you're not desperately seeking validation, people actually like you more.
It's another paradox.
It is. So many of these truths are paradoxical. The things we think will make us happy are the opposite of what actually makes us happy.
Now, I want to address something specific, and that's self-obsession in the context of social media.
Oh, this is huge. I think social media is basically training us to be self-obsessed.
How?
Because the whole structure of social media is, what are you doing? Post a picture, share your thoughts, let people like and comment on you. It's literally designed to make you focus on yourself.
And most of us spend hours a day on social media.
Right, so we're training our brains to be self-focused. It becomes a habit.
What's the alternative?
I think the first step is to reduce your time on social media. Set a limit or take a break.
And then what?
And then use that time to connect with people in real life, to have real conversations, to be present with the people you care about.
Because real connection is very different from digital connection.
It is. In real connection, you have to be present. You have to listen. You can't hide behind a screen.
And that presence is what actually reduces self-obsession.
Yes, because when you're fully present with someone, you're not thinking about yourself. You're just in the moment with them.
Now, here's a question. Is there such a thing as healthy self-focus?
That's a good question. I think, yes, there's a balance. You need to take care of yourself. You need to have goals. You need to know your own needs.
So it's not about never thinking about yourself.
Right. It's about not being obsessed with yourself. It's about having healthy self-care and self-knowledge, but also caring about others.
So it's a balance.
Yes, and I think the balance looks like you know yourself, you take care of yourself, but you also know that life is bigger than you. Other people matter. The world matters.
And when you have that perspective, you're much happier.
Much happier, because you're not carrying the weight of constantly promoting yourself and defending yourself and trying to prove your worth.
You're just living. You're connecting. You're contributing.
Exactly, and that's a much lighter way to live.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to ask you this. What was the biggest shift you experienced when you started becoming less self-obsessed?
The biggest shift was in my sense of purpose. When I stopped being so focused on myself, I started noticing other people's needs, and I started wanting to help them, and that gave me a sense of purpose that I never had before.
That's beautiful.
Because when you're self-obsessed, your only purpose is to make yourself happy. But that's not very fulfilling. But when you have a purpose that's about serving others, that's deeply fulfilling.
And I think that's something a lot of people are missing. We're trained to pursue success, to achieve, to accumulate, but we're not trained to think about contribution or service.
And service is what actually makes life meaningful.
So for anyone listening who is struggling with self-obsession, I want to say there's another way. You can shift your focus. You can learn to be genuinely interested in other people, and that will transform not just your relationships, but your whole life.
And for English learners, this shift is also going to improve your English because you'll be more engaged in conversations. You'll be learning from real interactions. You'll sound more natural and confident.
So it's a win-win.
It really is.
So here's what we want to ask you. If you've been struggling with self-obsession, or if you've noticed this pattern in your life, what's one thing you can do this week to shift your focus to others?
Maybe it's having one real conversation with someone where you really listen. Or maybe it's reducing your time on social media. Or maybe it's asking someone a deeper question and genuinely caring about the answer.
Whatever it is, pick something small, something you can actually do.
And then notice what happens. Notice how it feels. Notice how the other person responds.
Because I think once you experience real connection, you won't want to go back to self-obsession.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate you.
And remember to subscribe to Talk, Learn, Teach. We have new episodes every day.
And please share this episode with someone who needs it. Tell them about Talk, Learn, Teach.
In the comments, we would love to hear from you. What's your biggest struggle with self-focus? And what's one way you're going to practice being more interested in others?
Share your thoughts with us because this is a community and your experience might help someone else.
We read every comment, and your stories inspire us.
So thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for choosing to grow as a person and as a language learner.
We'll see you in the next episode.
Take care.
And remember, the world needs you to be more than yourself. The world needs you to care about others, and that's when you become your best self.
See you next time.
Bye, friends.